Welcome to this week's Parsha Shir, sponsored by Aaron and Lillian Fuchs and Jason Fuchs, in memory of Lillian's brother and Jason's uncle, Jack Julius Glatter. Yaakov Yehuda ben Yitzchak, Zichrono Levracha, whose yahrzeit is on the 14th of Kislev. His neshama should have an aliyah which would be Zeichet Tzitchias Hamesim. It's Parshas Vayishlach. We're going to talk about the shenanigans and the difficulties and the challenges that are in Yaakov Avinu's life. He has to fear from his brother who is going to kill him. We don't see that Avraham Avinu ever feared for his life from his brother. He had brothers. There was never any threat that he would be killed by any of them. We know that Yitzchak Avinu had a brother, Yishmael. We have no record of Yitzchak ever being frightened that he was going to get murdered by his brother. And then we have the story of Jacob and Esav. And there seems to be endless rivalry, but not the kind of rivalry that generally exists in a family between brothers who are vying for position, looking to be favourites in their parents' eyes or anything like that. This is life-threatening rivalry. The type of rivalry which could result in Yaakov being killed. Why? Because Esav hated him and Esav was a murderer. That's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at a beautiful piece of Nesivos Sholom. Hine Parshias Elu, he begins. These Parshias, these portions of the Torah that we have been reading in Bereshis, shall Sefer Bereshis, Melamdois lanu orchas derech Hashem. Do you know what they do? They teach us the ways of Hashem, what it is that Hashem wants from us, and how we should conduct ourselves during the course of our lives. Ukvar omad al kach b'sefer HaKodesh Toldot Yaakov Yosef be'inyanenu. And the fact is, Toldot Yaakov Yosef, I've mentioned the Toldot Yaakov Yosef before. He was an extraordinary Hasidic writer. He was the publisher of the very first Hasidic Sefer. In 1782 in Koretz, he published Toldot Yaakov Yosef. His name was Rabbi Yaakov Yosef HaKohen of Polnoi. It's in the Ukraine. He was a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov, a contemporary of the Mezritcher Maggid. We're not aware of any of his descendants inheriting his Hasidic mantle, the mantle of Hasidic leadership. However, he is the original source for us of the philosophy, the ideology, the theology of the Baal Shem Tov. So he's an extremely important resource for those who want to understand what it is that the Baal Shem Tov wanted in terms of having created a new movement within the frum Jewish world that we today call the world of Hasidus. It was a novel approach to Judaism, and the Toldot Yaakov Yosef provides us with a glimpse. We can look through the window into the Beis Medrash of the Baal Shem Tov through the words of the Toldot Yaakov Yosef. What does he say? He says, he says, what is it that we are going to see here in this parsha, in this chapter, in this episode, that describes the meeting of Yaakov and Esav, and generally speaking, this story, this chapter in the narratives of Bereshis that describe the relationship and the struggles in that relationship between these two brothers, Yaakov and Esav, these twins who were born to Yitzchak and Rivka. Frankly, says the Toldot Yaakov Yosef, it doesn't apply to us at all. We don't have brothers who want to kill us. And we are not in a situation where we have the types of challenges that face Yaakov Avinu in terms of his relationship with his brother Esav. And that being the case, what possible relevance could these stories have? Why did the Torah include them? The Torah, which is very sparing in its verbiage. We know that when it comes to halachic material in the Torah, every letter, not just every word, every letter counts. And therefore we need to understand why in the narrative portions of the Torah, it includes stories that seemingly are irrelevant to us. And particularly these stories of Yaakov and Esav. V'harei Torah hi nitzchis. We know that the Torah is eternal. Umelamedes lechol Yehudi eich lehisnaheg umaba'o lelamdeinu b'parsha zu. It teaches us, the Torah teaches us how we ought to behave, in which case, what are we to learn from this narrative, from this portion of the Torah? Says the Toldot Yaakov Yosef. He says, actually, the secret of these parashios, of the story between Jacob and Esav, the underlying narrative, the piece that isn't described to us in obvious terms, but which is the most obvious interpretation of what these narratives are all about, is that it's about the battle that exists between the two sides of the human condition. The side that we call the Yetzer Hara and the side that we call the Yetzer HaTov. That means there is an inclination within us that wants to completely divorce ourselves from the spiritual, from God. It's called the Yetzer Hara. And we have the Yetzer HaTov, that part of us which wants to cleave to Hashem. It's the neshama that wants to use every available avenue that we have in the physical material world to become closer to Hashem. These two vying forces, battling forces that exist within every human being are best analogized through the narrative of Jacob and Esav. Yaakov obviously representing the Yetzer HaTov, and Esav represents the Yetzer Hara. So we have this dynamic of the battle that goes on within all of us is amply described by the stories of Jacob and Esav fighting it out between them. So that's what the Toldot Yaakov Yosef says. Sheyesh li Yehudi lilmoid mikan. A Jew has the opportunity to learn from this if he studies these narratives. Derachim eich la'amoid b'milchama im Yitzray. Ways through this quagmire, through this very difficult situation that exists within all of us, how to emerge successful, how to emerge with the Yetzer HaTov having vanquished the Yetzer Hara. So now the platform that's presented to us, that's provided for us by the Toldot Yaakov Yosef, is going to be used by the Nesivos Sholom to really explain what was going on in these stories of Yaakov Avinu that we have last week's parsha and this week's parsha. We also need to understand, says the Nesivos Sholom, let's be honest. Of all the Avos, the one that struggled the most, that had the most difficulties in their life, at least described to us in the Torah. By the way, it's possible that Avraham Avinu had difficulties in his life that we are not aware of, because, as you know, the Torah is not a history book. And it could be the Yitzchak had struggles that we are not familiar with, because the Torah is not a history book. But the point is that the Torah does describe to us the struggles, the difficulties, the challenges that faced Yaakov Avinu in great detail, and it almost seems as if his life was an endless series of challenges and struggles. Avakim. Even before he came into the world, even before he emerged as a born child, Kavar hischilum avakov im Esav. He already had these terrible struggles with Esav. Vayisroitzatzu habonim bekirba k'mo shenemar shekvar oz nevak im Esav. Already then he was struggling. He was trying to overcome, through the struggle, overcome his brother Esav. V'achakach nechleku ala b'choron. Afterwards they had this difference, or at least this battle, this competition about who is the firstborn, and later on we know that they had this challenging situation as to who would receive the blessings from Yitzchak. And after that, for 20 years, we know that Yaakov Avinu was in the home of Lavan, 7 years for Rachel, 7 years for Leah, and 6 years in which he was working for Lavan. We know that throughout that period of time, throughout those 2 decades, his life was challenging in the extreme as he battled it out with his evil, cunning, scheming father-in-law, who wanted nothing more than to completely undermine him in every possible way. And he is a true representation of the alternative side of reality, at least for us, which we call the klippa. That means something that is entirely devoid, as it were, of the Shekhinah. The klippa is the polar opposite of what the neshama seeks to associate itself with. K'mo shenemar, zeli esrim shona beveisecha avadaticha arba esrei shona b'shtei benoisecha v'sheishonim b'tzoincha v'techlaf es maskurti esrim moinim. Yaakov Avinu says to his father-in-law, do you know what a criminal you are? Do you know what a crook you are? I've been 20 years in your home. 7 years I worked for one daughter, 7 years for another, 6 years I was just working for you as someone who was running your affairs. I was the CEO of your agricultural concerns, and there was not a time when you didn't try to outsmart me, outdo me, and to cheat me of what I was meant to be getting from you in the work that I was doing. And 20 times, up to 20 times, that's what it says here, you try to change my payment terms. V'kasher chazar mi beis Lavan ba likrosai Esav 400 ish imoy. Okay, so he managed to emerge somehow from the home of Lavan, comes back to Eretz Canaan. Guess what? Now he's up against an army led by his hateful brother Esav, who is intent on killing him. And even before he meets Esav, even as he faces almost certain obliteration and extermination at the hands of Esav and his army, he has to fight with the Sar Shel Esav, and we know what happened there. He prevailed, but it caused him damage. He was damaged in his hip, in his thigh. We know that this Sar Shel Esav was in fact the Satan, was in fact the ultimate form of evil that can exist, that God has put into the universe, that we know that Yaakov Avinu had to battle it out against the force of evil that is the ultimate force of evil. We really need to understand all of these mavakim. We don't see Avram and Yitzhak having the same level of challenge in any of the events of their life as we see with Yaakov Avinu. Although they did face challenges, these were few and far between. They weren't the types of challenges that completely overwhelmed their life story. It seems that Yaakov Avinu never had a peaceful period in his life. He was challenged in every given situation. At every turn, he was almost thwarted in his journey. And that is something that's unique to Yaakov and something that we don't see by Abraham and Yitzchak. Says the Nesivos Sholom, there's something else that we need to explore. Vayishlach Jacob malachim el Esav achiv artzos seir. It says that Yaakov Avinu sent malachim to Esav, his brother, who was from the Eretz Seir, stay Edom, Vayitzav Oisam, and he told them what to say. He gave them instructions as to how they should address Esav. Im Lavan garti and he says that I lived with Lavan. That's what he tells the malachim to say to Esav, and I've been delayed until now from returning to Eretz Canaan. In other words, he was offering some form of explanation as to why it was that he's been away from Canaan for so long. This was the message that he sent to Esav Achiv, as it's referred to in the Pasuk, to Esav, his brother. Vayeshuva malachim el Yaakov, and the malachim returned to Yaakov, Lamar, and they said, Banu el achicha el Esav, we came to your brother, to Esav, v'gam hoylech likroscha, and he is coming towards you. Vayira Yaakov ma'od, vayitzaloi. Yaakov was very frightened. He was gripped with fear. Hatzileni no miyad achi miyad Esav, he says to Hashem, save me from the hands of my brother, from the hands of Esav. Now, did you notice something slightly different in these two references to Esav as opposed to the original reference of Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim? Says the Nesivos Sholom, if we look at the words, if we look at the phrasing of what it is that Yaakov Avinu presented to the Malachim to say to his brother Esav, it is El Esav Achiv, Esav my brother, Esav his brother. That Esav comes first. But when we see that the Malachim came back, it's the other way round. Bonu el achicha el Esav, to your brother, to Esav. Not to Esav your brother, but to your brother, to Esav. Mikoidem achicha v'acha kach, Esav first, they put the word your brother, achicha, and afterwards they put the word Esav. Umiyad kasheshama Yaakov is Debrahim. And immediately Yaakov hears what they're saying. What does he do? He says as follows. He says, Es Devrem shebonu el achicha Esav bikesh gam hu hatzilenu no miyad achi miyad Esav. He also flips the wording around, and instead of saying hatzilenu no miyad Esav miyad achi, he says hatzilenu no miyad achi miyad Esav. Ukvar hiktim achi leEsav v'chol zeh ta'ama boi. And all of this requires an explanation. We need to know why this wording was swapped around, why the word ach comes after Esav in the introduction, and why later on it comes before Esav, in first of all in what the Malachim said to him, and later on in his prayer to Hashem for to be saved. V'yesh lefarish bazeh. So first explanation is as follows. We're going to have two explanations, and this is the first. Dari Yaakov hu bechir ha'avos. Let's understand who Yaakov Avinu was. Yaakov Avinu deserves special attention. He deserves, or at least we would expect to see that he gets more attention than the other Avos, because he is known as the Bechir HaAvos. He is the chosen one of the patriarchs. He is the most significant of all the patriarchs. Why? Because all of his children are the fathers of the Jewish nation. He may have been the forefather, but they are the originators of each tribe of Israel, and therefore, as opposed to Abraham, who had several children, but we know of Yitzchak and we know of Yishmael, only Yitzchak is the one to carry forward the plan for the Jewish nation. So we discard Yishmael in that respect. And then Yitzchak has Jacob and Esav. So we know that Yaakov is the one to carry the plan forward, that Esav is, at least for this intent, he is discarded. But when it comes to Yaakov, there is no one who is discarded from that list. All of the Shiftei Ka, all of the 12 tribes, the 12 sons of Yaakov, become the fathers of the Jewish nation. He is the Bechir HaAvos. V'al Shemai misyachsim Yisrael hanikroim b'nei Yisrael. And that is why the Jewish nation is never referred to as the Jewish nation until much later in history. How are we referred to? We're always referred to with the word Yisrael involved. Whether it's B'nei Yisrael, Klal Yisrael, Knesset Yisrael, the word Yisrael, Israel, is always associated with the Jewish people. Why would that be? Because Yaakov Avinu's name is Yisrael, and he is the Bechir HaAvos. He is at the top of the pyramid, as it were, of the Jewish nation. It begins with him, goes to 12 tribes, they all have children, etc., all the way through down to us. And whereas above him in the pyramid is Yitzchak, but Yitzchak has another child, and that other child has his own children that we've seen described. And above Yitzchak is Avraham, and Avraham has another child, Yishmael, and all of his children are in that family tree. But when it comes to Yaakov Avinu, he is named Yisrael, and all of the Jewish nation throughout history is referred to as Israel, the Israelites, the Bnei Yisrael, Klal Yisrael, etc. The HaTorah Kedosha Kosva Parshias Elu Shel Avokov Shel Yaakov Hamelamdos Torah Shelema Lavanov Shel Yaakov. The reason why we have much more information regarding Yaakov and all the struggles he went through is because this is meant to give us, as it were, a complete instruction manual of how we are to conduct ourselves as the descendants of Jacob, the descendants of Israel. Shekol Chayov Shel Yehudi Tzarichu Lehavok. Because you have to know that the life of every Jew is part of the struggle of Yaakov Avinu. We carry forward that struggle. We have the struggles that existed for Yaakov Avinu, we have them in our own lives. And therefore the struggles of Yaakov Avinu are relevant to us. They are pertinent to our lives because we struggle with the koichos hara and the koichos haklipa. We struggle with the forces of evil and the forces of the husk, as it's referred to in the Kabbalah, the outer edge of the material world, which is completely devoid of any type of godliness and spirituality. V'soifai, and at the end, shemikol elu mehamavakim hu yoytze tomit im revochim. And the fact is, at the end of all these stories of the struggles, if you look at the stories, he always emerges having profited, having benefited. That's what the word revochim would best be translated as. He has benefited from the struggles that he has gone through. K'moisha hoya itzel Yaakov she'achar ma'avakim hamalach omaloi lo Yaakov yomer oit shemecha ki im Yisrael. So when he fought with the Sar shel Esav, what happened at the end of it? The Malach says to him, the angel, this Sar shel Esav says to him, don't worry, now that it's over, I want to tell you something really important. Your name is no longer going to be Yaakov, your name is going to be Yisrael. Why? Because ki sarisa im Elokim ve'im anoshim vatuchal. Because you have fought, you have struggled, you have been challenged by and engaged in fights with God and with people. Somehow all of these struggles have made you who you are, vatuchal, because you've always emerged victorious. All of the different battles, whether it's in the spiritual sphere or whether it's in the physical sphere, somehow you've always managed to emerge victorious. You are Yisrael, ki sarisai meloikim ve'imanoshim vatuchal. You are a vatuchal person, and that's who you are. So you might think, what's the point of the struggle? But as they say in English, no pain, no gain. If he wouldn't have gone through those struggles, he could never have been Yisrael, and therefore he could never have been the father of what we refer to as Bnei Yisrael, or Klal Yisrael, or Knesset Yisrael. The word Yisrael was only invented as a result of the experiences of his struggles. That's who Yaakov Avinu was. V'kach mikol hanisyonos v'hamavakim shel Yaakov yotzim revochim. And that's true of all the struggles that Yaakov Avinu went through. He always emerged with benefit, having benefited from the experience. Umikan limud la Yehudi, and from this every Jew can learn. We have all got a lesson to learn from this. Shekol seder chayav tzarich liyos rotzuf ma'avakim v'soifai shemikulam hu yoytze berevachim. Because every Jew needs to realize that their lives are going to be full of such struggles. Every day you're going to wake up in the morning, you're going to feel, oh, I'm so positive, I feel good about myself, about Hashem, and then you're going to encounter a challenge. Some challenge is going to come your way, and suddenly it's going to distract you from your true purpose, from your true journey, from the correct path. And how are you going to deal with that struggle? So you're going to overcome it. You're going to say, I'm not going to do this thing which has come my way, which is going to drag me away from my relationship with Hashem. And how are you going to emerge from that struggle? You might think during the struggle, why is Hashem testing me? But after having emerged from that struggle and you have prevailed, you'll be a better person. You will have emerged with what the Nesivos Sholom refers to as revochim, with benefits. Ubeparshias elu shel Lavan v'shel Esav me'irlanu haTorah kedosha drochim b'avodas Hashem u'v'melchemes hayetze. And in these parshios, last week Vayetze and this week Vayishlach, where we see Yaakov battling it out with first Lavan and later on with Esav, we can all learn lessons of how we ought to conduct ourselves in the midst of the struggles that we all face. You're going to see the Nesivos Sholom describes it beautifully. We all face these challenges. Don't think that you are immune from them. You're not immune from them. Yaakov Avinu had certain immunities, as we're going to see, but ultimately we are all going to be challenged. Wherever we are on the map, we are going to be challenged by a Lavan and by an Esav. It's a fact, and we need help, and we need assistance, and we need siyata dishmaya in order to emerge to have prevailed, to be victorious, but when we do, we emerge with revochim. We become reflections, we become echoes, all of these many millennia later of Yaakov Avinu, of the foundational figure of the Jewish nation, the Bechir HaAvos, the main one of all of the patriarchs, whose image is emblazoned on the Kisei HaKavod, on the heavenly throne of God Himself. So we continue with the Nesivos Sholom. We'll learn from Lavan and from Esav what it is that we need to focus on, what it is that we need to be afraid of, and how we can overcome those challenges. How Yaakov did it will be an example to us. You know that once something has happened once, it can happen again. Once Yaakov has been the trailblazer in beating back a Lavan and having been victorious against Esav, we have the opportunity to do the same thing. Klipas Lavan hu inyan hapagam b'mayach. So let's start with Lavan. Although this is only relevant really to Parshas Vayetze, nevertheless, if we're going to discuss the Mavakim of Yaakov Avinu, it makes sense to discuss it in terms of both Lavan and Esav. Let's take a look at Lavan. Lavan is somebody who represents a pagam in the mayach, some disability in the brain. It's a spiritual disability. It doesn't mean that you are mentally defective. It means that your brain is not functioning at a spiritual level. B'deos v'hashkofos. You have views, you have ideas that that run counter to what it is you should have as a person who has faith. Kfira upagomim be'emuna. We're talking about denying God, heresy, and somehow lacking in faith in Hashem. And we know this because Lavan possessed these idols, these graven images that were stolen by his daughter. You know that when Rachel left, she took them away, and he never found them, even though he came to look for them. But they were a representation of his belief in heretical, in God-denying sources of whatever he thought that they were. But he did not believe in God. He was a pagan. That is a pagam in the mayach. He both denied the divinity of God, and he denied that there is such a thing, that God guides your life and is directly involved in your individual journey. Benoisai va'abonim bonai v'chol asher ato royeh lihu. He says to Yaakov Avinu, these boys, these sons as you call them, are mine. They're my children. And these daughters, they're my daughters. And everything that you see, it's mine. What was he saying? What is the code for? What is Lavan actually telling Yaakov Avinu? Says the Nesivos Sholom shekofar b'anhoga ha'elyoina. He totally denied that there was any kind of divine involvement in all of the things that his family had, whether it was in terms of offspring, children, boys, girls, whether it was in terms of the possessions that they owned. It had nothing to do with God. It had everything to do with him. He believed that only through the strength of his work and his brilliance and his ability and his talent and his whatever it was, whatever you're going to call it, he was the one who had amassed all of these people, these possessions in terms of his children and grandchildren, and in terms of his material possessions. Lavan, it was all about him. Ego, it's all about me, me, me. There's no such thing as God. There's only Lavan in the equation. And that's what it means when the Chazal interpret the we say it every year in the Haggadah Pesach, that Lavan wanted to destroy Hakoil, everything. What is Hakoil? What does he talking about? He wanted to destroy everything. What does it mean he wanted to uproot everything? Hakoil. Merumaz bazeh al ha'emuna shehi Hakoil. Says the Nesivos Sholom, this means the word Hakoil is a code word for emunah. Because if you believe that everything that you have comes from Hashem, if you have complete faith that your success is totally down to God's involvement in your life, then Hakoil is Hashem. It's automatic. As A Jewish person believes that whatever they have, whatever they own, however successful they are, is only as a result of God being involved with them. You worship God with emunah. Because if that's your belief system, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, it doesn't matter if you have many children or few children, or no children, or you weren't successful in the thing that you tried to do, whatever it is, or you're extremely successful. Either way, whatever it is that comes your way is always from Hashem. It is the basis of emunah. Everything that happens in your life and whatever you do every day, you live the life of emunah. You live a life of faith. It's accompanied at every stage of the way by this concept of emunah. Vehi etzloi chazois hakol. And if you look, whatever you look at, whichever way you turn, you're always saying, Baruch Hashem, fantastic, Hashem provided me with all of these things. V'Lavan bikesh la'aker es hakoil. What was Lavan's intent? He wanted to totally undermine this concept. He wanted to do away with it. He wanted to say, don't be ridiculous. God has nothing to do with it. He wanted bikesh la'aker es hakoil. Hainu sheklipas Lavan mevakeshes la'aker miyehudi es emuna shehakoil. If you want to know what Lavan's intention was, what his ultimate goal was, he wanted to totally uproot this concept of faith, of belief in God from the heart of every Jew. If you want to know the absolute opposite, the Lavan way of doing things is to deny God's involvement in everything and to lack faith, to not believe in faith as a foundation for what's going on in your life. It totally undermines the hakoil in a Jew. If you want to know something, and this is really important, I know the Nesivos Sholom has said this before in other contexts, but here he presents it to us again. If you want to undermine a Jew, just take away his emunah. That's all you need to do. If you take away his emunah, you will have destroyed the Jew. For as long as a Jew believes in Hashem, even if he's going to have sinned in every possible way, he's a sinner. Why? We're going to see there's such a thing as a sinner, somebody who's a chote, but he does it only lete'avoin, because he can't help it. He wants those things. That's going to be a description of Esav. But he doesn't do it because he lacks emunah. Then there's hope. That means, Lavan wanted to eradicate that hope. But if somebody does things and has emunah in Hashem at the same time, he's doing the Aveira, but there's a part of him that's ashamed, that's embarrassed, that knows he's doing the wrong thing, then he has hope for the future. Yeshle adayin tikkun. There is hope. There is some possibility of repairing himself, of doing the right thing, of doing teshuvah, of coming back to what he needs to be or she needs to be. If somebody gets infected, that's the word, infected with this bug, with this sickness of God denial, of heresy, harei kol baya lo yeshuvon. There's no way. There is absolutely no way of returning from any of the aspects of his life that he has done wrong. If you sin and you don't believe in Hashem, why would you ever regret it? Why would you ever do teshuvah? And in this sense, Lavan wanted to destroy everything. Al yedei pegam ha'emunah. He wanted to eradicate, to undermine, to completely obliterate this concept of emunah. Remove faith from Yaakov, he's been successful, because even if Yaakov does a mitzvah at that stage, it's not really a mitzvah because he doesn't believe in Hashem. Ukeneged zetan Yaakov vatchalefes maskurti aseres moinim. You have changed that which you should have paid me. You've changed it 10 times. You have totally undermined my ability to function, to operate, because you keep on changing the rules. You keep on changing moving the goalposts so that I cannot operate. All of the 10 attributes, characteristics of a human being are represented in emunah. Emunah touches on every facet of the human existence. She'oz hu ke'eno Yehudi bichlal. And if every one of those facets has become infected by a lack of faith, by a vacuum of faith, then the human condition or that person's ability to function as a person of faith has been obliterated, has been destroyed. V'zeu ma sheshalach Yaakov le'Esav, and that's what it means when Yaakov sent Esav a message. He said, "Im Lavan garti, I lived with Lavan," and as the Medrash says, "V'tariag mitzvah shamarti, I observed all of the mitzvahs." There was not one mitzvah that I didn't observe, and we've discussed this in a previous share that I've given on this topic. What does it mean when Yaakov Avinu says he kept all of the 613 mitzvahs? Obviously, it can't mean that he kept all of the 630 mitzvahs because they're not all relevant to one individual, but he's giving over a conceptual idea. There is not one mitzvah where I have a pagam in my emunah. Hainu, sheklipas Lavan loy poga bi be'emu'uma. There's not one element of my faith relationship with God that has been affected by your incredibly determined attempts to undermine them. I am as strong in my faith now, he's telling Esav, as I was before I went to the house of Lavan, despite his determined efforts to remove faith from my life. The clipper of Lavan was not able to infect me, was not able to affect me in any way. Behirusa, and my emunah is as clear and as straightforward and as complete now as it was even before I went there. Sheloi ripa es yodi b'shum mitzvah. He wasn't able to distract, to move my hand, to change my way of doing things in the smallest way even, at any point during my 20 years with him. As Tariag mitzvah shomarti. That's what it means. I lived with Lavan and it didn't make any impact on my emunah. That's what he's telling Esav. V'oid efshel farish, we can also interpret it slightly differently. Inyan klipas Lavan she'omar habonos benoisai v'abonim bonai v'kol asher ata roya lihu. When he said that the sons are my sons, the daughters are my daughters, and everything that you see is mine. You know, the Berditchever, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak said once about a Baldin, somebody came before him, somebody came to him and said, listen, I may not be the Rebbe, but I'm a partner with you in everything that you do. Why? Because I'm always around. Because everything that I do, says the Berditchever, the truth is, he is there. He's always in shul, he comes to my house, he does it. And so he says, listen, I'm the same as you. Why am I different? I'm a partner in everything that you do. I listen to your shiurim, so you may have done the learning to prepare the shir, but I listen to your shir, so I'm no different than you. And I daven in the same shul, so you may be davening with more kavanah than me, but I'm davening alongside you, so I'm your partner in davening. I'm have this superior approach to Yiddishkeit. Why? Because you're a super chassid. You're somebody who's lifnim mishura sadin, and you believe in the concept of Hasidus. You're an idealist. Therefore, I must be an idealist. Why? Because I'm here. I live in Berditchev. I'm a member of your community, and therefore I'm no different to you. That's what the Berditchev has said. Obviously, tongue in cheek, but he has a point to make. Says the Nesivos Sholom, Yesh b'chinas Yetzer Hara matel mum b'kodshim. There's a part of the Yetzer Hara that actually infects, becomes like a tiny root of infection in kodshim, and it can be a psul. It can undermine the kodshim, it can undermine the spirituality here referred to in terms of korbanos. But if there's a part of the Yetzer Hara that is a partner of everything good that you do, there is a part of you, even when you're doing a good thing, that does the good thing, and there's some bad involved. It's not entirely good. Let's say you're critical of somebody. The reason you're critical is because you don't like them. And the truth is they did something very wrong, and it's very important for that person to be exposed as a wrongdoer, but there's a bias on your part because you've never liked that person. Or you're somebody who when you do a mitzvah, you're doing a mitzvah because you want to show off. So you're a show-off, you're a balgaiva, So the part of the mitzvah that's the Balgaiva is from the Yetzer Hara. It's not from the Yetzer Tov. You're still doing the mitzvah. You're shaking the most beautiful lulav and esrog in the whole shul, but there's a part of you that's patting yourself on the back saying, see, my lulav and esrog is much nicer than everybody else's. So that's part of it. That's the Yetzer Hara part of the doing of the mitzvah. It's misarev. It mixes, it's mixed up in the mitzvah that you do. Because you have the wrong thoughts when you do it, or the wrong intentions. You're not quite as pure in your intentions as you should be when you do that mitzvah. There's something even worse. What does it mean when it says that Lavan wanted to destroy everything? He wanted, through his partnership with the person that's doing good, to destroy everything that's good within them. Not only that he mixed ra, bad, with toiv, with good, but he implants within the person the root, and therefore the control of the evil, until everything good that person does, actually the foundation is evil, and therefore it becomes totally evil. You've got people, by the way, who look as if they are the biggest tzaddikim, and they're learning, and they're davening, and they're doing all the mitzvahs, and they're fully religious, fully observant in every possible way, but the essence of it is from the wrong root. They're not doing it for the right reasons. They're doing it because they want to make an impression, or because they feel that what they're saying is going to make them look good and going to make other people feel bad. And ultimately, there's no element of the mitzvah that they're doing that's being done for the right purposes. There's no element of the mitzvah that's based in Yetzer HaTov. It's all based in Yetzer Hara. You know that there's a story, it's in the Sipurim of the Baal Shem Tov, the stories about the Baal Shem Tov. He once walked into a shul in Podolia. He was on one of his many journeys. He traveled throughout his life. He loved to go from one community to another. And he walks into a shul. It's a beautiful shul. And he says, this shul is full of tefillos. And everybody was so happy. He says, no, you misunderstood me. What I'm saying is it's full of tefillos because none of the tefillos in here were meant l'shem shamayim. Therefore, they never left the shul. They're still here. They're not in shamayim. In other words, none of your prayers ever had the effort that was put into them that would elevate them to the heavenly realms. And therefore, even though you think you prayed, you said Shemona Esrei, you said Shema, you said whatever it is you said, that all those prayers remained, as it were, down here in the physical realm, in the material realm, and never made its way into the heavens. That's that sad aspect of people who feel that because they're doing the right thing and therefore their intentions don't count, and what happens is they do the mitzvah, but the mitzvah isn't really a mitzvah because it's rooted in bad, it's rooted in the wrong place, it's not rooted in avodas Hashem, it's rooted in personal motives that have nothing whatsoever to do with God. And that's what the Nesivos Sholom is saying here about Lavan. He's saying that Lavan wanted to totally uproot everything. The entire basis, the foundation of good that exists within a Jewish person, that's what Lavan wants to do. Not only does he mix ra with toiv, he makes the ra the primary force behind everything good that the person does, until there is no good. It's all bad. Shezehu mashe klipas lovon oimeres habonos benoisai vabonim bonai v'cholashe atoroya lihu. Hainu shakoil machmosi. In other words, Lavan is saying, you see all of this, you think that this is all from the good? Not at all. This is all rooted in evil. I'm in charge here. I'm the one who has taken charge. I live in the material world, and I have managed to completely overwhelm any aspect of good, any aspect of positivity that may exist. Mitoy chavonos rais, because I have got evil intent. I deny the existence of God, and I deny and I don't allow the service of God. It's possible. I have to tell you, it's possible. It's possible that somebody can daven every tefillah and learn and have completely the wrong intentions. This sounds very musari. It's not very Hasidic, but it's musar based on Hasidus. In other words, and which makes sense because Slonim was at the heart of the world, which was steeped in Musar. It was much closer to the Lithuanian, Litvish center of gravity than it was to the Hasidic center of gravity. And the Slonim Rebbe very often strays into the world of Musar, even if he's expounding Hasidus. And here we have such an example, because what we're seeing here is that the Nesivos Sholom is saying that it may have the appearance of good, but actually it's bad. And with this, he wants to completely undermine and destroy everything. But what Lavan wants to achieve is that everything that is good is totally built on a foundation of evil. That this side of Lavan is very furtive, because it doesn't tell you to do a bad thing. What it does is it tells you you're doing something good, but the source of that good is from an evil place. I want to now move on to the next piece so that I finish within the hour. I want to move on to the next piece, which talks about Esav, because of course this week is the parsha of Jacob and Esav. Last week was Parshas Vayetze, where we spoke about Lavan and Yaakov. This week is the parsha of Esav. So far we've talked about a mumar lahachis. So Lavan is a mumar lahachis, somebody whose only intention is not to tell people not to do mitzvahs, but to tell people that even if you do mitzvahs, don't believe in Hashem. He wants to undermine faith. He wants to undermine emunah. But Esav is a representation of something completely different that we're all familiar with. A mumar lete'ovain. Somebody who doesn't deny God so that they can say, I've got some different theological view, or I don't believe in the existence of God, I'm an atheist, I'm an agnostic, or something like that. I can believe in God, but I want to do Averis. I enjoy Averis. My life is steeped in sin. That's what I want to do. That is what Esav represents. Lavan represents one side of the challenge that we face as Yaakovs in this world, and Esav represents another side of what it is that we face as Yaakovs. It's tavis, it's the inclinations that we have, the things that we want. Everybody has them. Some people, it's in one area of their human condition. Other people, it's in another area of their human condition. But ultimately, we all have it. We all have these weaknesses, these human frailties that exist in our lives. He's known as the Red One. Why? Red is symbolic of blood that pumps through the system. We call them in English hot-blooded. They do all kinds of things, not because necessarily they don't believe in God, but because they're impulsive, and that hot-bloodedness is what drives them to do the wrong thing. Because every part of their existence drives them in the direction of doing the wrong thing, because they have the desires to do the Averis, whatever they may be. And we see that Esav is referred to in Chazal in this way. They talk about all the terrible things that Esav did. It's not mentioned in the Torah. We don't know from the Torah's narrative that Esav was so evil, but Chazal fill in the gaps, and they tell us that Esav was somebody, there was no Avera that Esav hadn't done. And this is the key point. This side of Esav is divided into two parts. And that's what it means when it says, save me from my brother, save me from Esav. What is it talking about? There's one which is very straightforward. There's a clipper that comes along and says, do an Avera. Just do an Avera. That's a Yetzer Hara. You know, you're passing by McDonald's, go and eat treif meat. Go and eat meat and milk, basar v'cholav. That's a straightforward Avera that you should do. That's an Esav Avera. V'yesh klipo shel tavos heter sheyetzer hara mischaze ke'ochiv ve'eno mefateu le'averos she'onesh aleim elo mefateu le'tavos shel heter. There's a different type of Avera. It's a much more common type of Avera, where you're driven to do things which, on the face of it, are permitted. There's nothing wrong with doing those things. I can do them. They're allowed. But by doing them, you are distracting yourself from your true path. I think we're all very familiar with these things. Yet whatever it may be in terms of food. You've never eaten treif in your life, but you cut corners and you're spending time eating when you should be doing other things. Or it could be that, you're on your phone. I mean, that's the modern version of this Yad Ochi version of Esav. The phone is a distraction. I'm in shul, I should be davening, but I'm busy texting, I'm WhatsApping, and I'm looking at my phone. Is there anything wrong? Is it an Avera? Are you not allowed to look at your phone in shul? I mean, there's nothing in the Shulchan Aruch about smartphones and looking at smartphones in shul, or even distractions in shul. But are you doing the right thing? That is a Miyad Ochi Avera. That's an Avera which you could say, it's a Tzada Heter. I've done nothing wrong. I'm not anti-God. I'm not an agnostic. I'm not an atheist. I'm not even somebody who's doing an Avera. I'm not playing with my phone on Shabbos. What are you talking about? I'm a Shomer Shabbos. I'm 100% Shomer Shabbos. I would never touch my phone on Shabbos. But during the week, comes to shul, I feel my phone buzzing in my pocket. I look at my phone, somebody it's very important. If I don't reply to the text right away, who knows what's going to happen? What do you mean, who knows what's going to happen? 10 years ago, nobody texted you because you didn't have a smartphone. There was no such thing. 20 years ago, for sure, there was no such thing as a phone that you could text replies. And you certainly would never have brought a phone to shul because no such thing as a cell phone, but people didn't have cell phones 30 years ago. And 40 years ago, you were lucky if you had a phone at home. And now you've got a phone in shul, and you're taking it out, and you should be davening, you should be saying Shema with Kavana, you should be saying Birkus Kriya Shema with Kavana, you should be saying Psukei de Zimra with Kavana. Or you come in late to shul because you're busy with your phone. Just giving you one silly little example of something which you could say is completely heter. It's completely mutter. You're totally allowed to do it. And yet, it is a side of Esav. It's a side of a mumar lete'avain. You're not somebody who's a bal avera. But are you somebody who's aspiring to be closer to Hashem? This is a side that Yaakov Avinu suddenly discovered was much more frightening than Yad Esav. Hatzileni no miyad ochi miyad Esav. Yad ochi comes first. Because what happened is that the Malachim come back, and in fact, we see it when Esav and Yaakov finally meet up, that Esav is quite friendly to Yaakov Avinu, and he wants him to accompany him wherever he's going, and Yaakov Avinu says, I can't. What is he most frightened of? Initially, he was frightened that Esav is going to be Esav. But later on, he's frightened that Esav is going to be Achiv. So at the beginning, he says, Vayishlach Malachim el Esav Achiv, because Esav comes first. It says in Nesivos Sholom, but when they come back, is Hatzileni no miyad Achi miyad Esav. And I think, you know what? That's the part that's most relevant to us in the Esav sphere. And in these two parashiyos of Vayetze and Vayishlach, but generally speaking, in the struggles that we see that Yaakov Avinu had to contend with, the thing that's most concerning is the thing that seems most innocent. Miyad Ochi is the part of Yaakov's challenges and our challenges, because as descendants of the Bechir Ha'avos, we are faced with the very same challenges in every aspect of our lives. And we may be faced with the challenge of Kfirah, but that's less likely. We may be faced with the challenges of doing Averis that we shouldn't do, that we know are Averis, and hopefully that's less likely too. The one that we need to be most frightened of and most conditioned to deal with is to be saved. Hatzileni no miyad ochi. Save me from that which seems innocuous. that seems innocent, but which could threaten my equilibrium in terms of my relationship with Hashem. We'll leave it here for today. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for watching.